Good afternoon and greetings from Michigan. Welcome to Learning and Performance Trends, a conversation. My name is Marie Lateo. I'm a Business Development Executive at Innovative Learning Group, and we are thrilled to have you join us today. As for some context, I'd like to give you a brief overview of ILG, and for those of you who don't know and are completely familiar with the company, here's a little bit about us. We're located in Troy, Michigan, just about 20 miles or so from Detroit. We were founded in 2004 by our presenter today, Lisa Toenniges, and we are also a certified business enterprise, women's business enterprise. And we found that's a fact that's important to many of our organizations we work with as they look for ways to increase their diversity amongst their suppliers and vendors. What we really care about and what differentiates us is our focus on performance and helping organizations reach their business goals. For us, it's always performance first. As you can see on this slide, we work with a diverse group of medium and large-sized companies across the country, some of which we also serve on a global basis. During our 12 years in business, we've worked with more than 100 clients across 35 industries. About 75% of our work is outside of Southeast Michigan. In fact, about 60% is outside of Michigan. A few notes before we start. We invite all of you to chime in at any time during the session with questions or comments you may have using the chat feature that's located at the left of your screen. Now, we might not be able to get back to your message or your question immediately during this webinar, but we will get back with you following the presentation. Also, following the webinar, you will receive an email from us with a short survey. Please take time and fill it out because we love our feedback. And finally, we are recording this session, so early next week, you will receive a YouTube link along with this slide deck. Now for a little bit about our presenter, Lisa Toenniges. Many of you attending today are familiar with Lisa, but for those of you who don't know her, as I mentioned earlier, she's the CEO and founder of ILG. She has more than 25 years of experience in the performance and improvement industry and has consulted with many Fortune 1000 companies about their learning and performance strategies and solutions. Lisa is a certified performance technologist and is endorsed by International Society for Performance Improvement, ISPI. In 2015, she completed her term as past president of the society. Lisa, let's get this conversation started.
All right. Well, thanks, Marie, and good afternoon, everybody. It's really terrific to be here and to be having a conversation today with such a big crowd. I think we have nearly 110 people or something registered today. So it seems like this topic of learning and performance trends is really something that's resonating with folks in the market today. And as a company, this is something we pay close attention to as well, because one of our vision statements actually reads, fosters continuous learning and an unwillingness to stand still. And I guess the reason I've called our presentation today a conversation is because I want us all to be able to share, what have we read, what have we heard, what have we tried that worked, what have we tried that hasn't worked. So separate from chat, just maybe on your smartphone or on a slip of paper, right now go ahead and write down one thing you'd like to try doing that you're not doing today. One thing you'd like to try doing but not doing today. Go ahead and jot that down, put it in your smartphone, put it on a slip of paper. Because what we're going to do today is look at about 12 trends. And you may be asking, well, how'd you land on these 12 or where'd they come from? I think from a couple things. First, from the many literature sources that we look at, as well as, like Marie said, we work with over 100 clients. What are they talking about? What's top of mind? So we're going to have a conversation about these 12, and we'll be flexible, so we may or may not get to all 12. But let's look at these. As we go down the list here, we've got learning and performance ecosystem, mobile, microlearning, learning portals, social learning, gamification, Agile, personalization, mindfulness, storytelling, data analytics, and augmented reality or virtual reality. So I'm guessing you've heard of a lot of these, but take a minute now and go into chat. Tell me any of these 12 that you haven't heard of. So go ahead into chat and tell me any you haven't heard of. And at the same time, if you like, tell me any you're surprised are not on the list. That'll give us some ideas for future webinars. Any trends that you see not on the list? Okay, mindfulness is new to some folks. Augmented reality is new. Okay, Agile is new to somebody. Thank you for all these great comments. A few people, augmented reality is new. Excellent. All right, well that will help me as we get started. So I think before we dive in, it's fair to say that many of these have a technology component to them. But what I want to remind us all is that it's never a good idea to start with technology. You know, it should never start with a technology solution in search of a use, right? As good performance consultants, we know that we should always start with a solid performance analysis. What's our desired state, what's our current state, and what's our gap? And based on that gap, you know, have we done a good root cause analysis and landed on the best solution? It should never be just because, you know, somebody comes to us and says, hey, I want to do social learning, right? We want to do that first good performance analysis. So one of my favorite gurus, Mark Rosenberg, says, you know, you cannot fix bad training with technology alone. And using technology with bad training can make it worse. It's how we use the technology to enhance learning, not the technology itself, which counts. So while we're talking about Mark Rosenberg, let's go ahead and start with our first trend, which actually is a concept from Mark, the learning and performance ecosystem. So the definition here, enhancing individual and organizational effectiveness by connecting people and supporting them with a broad range of content and processes and technologies to drive performance. I think it's fair to say, right, the increasing complexity of the world in which we live and work requires us to be more sophisticated in how we learn. So this means we need to move away from just individual one-off solutions to an ecosystem that's comprised of multi-faced learning and performance options. So Mark talks about, you know, the idea of shifting the attention from the classroom to the workplace. You know, it's the idea that it's not separate but a part of. Mark even likes to call people workers, not learners or participants. So what you see here on the graphic is that people are at the center of Mark's framework, and then we have content and technology and process surrounding it. So the idea here is that it minimizes the need for workers to leave work in order to learn. So let's talk about this framework for a minute. If we start in the upper right corner with talent management, that's about really managing and developing the workforce. If we go down that column, performance support is any learning modality or resource or asset that's accessible at the moment of need. And then we have knowledge management, which provides easy access and reliable access to information. As we go up kind of clockwise around, we see access to experts, which is really about leveraging expertise in an organization. If we keep going up that column, social networking and collaboration is encouraging the exchange of knowledge and ideas. Structured learning, of course, is something we're all familiar with, where we need to train and certify and meet compliance requirements. So I think clearly, right, workers become better connected with the people and processes and content and technology that help them to learn and perform and succeed. Another nice quote from Mark is, workplace considerations trump training considerations. Right? So in chat, can any of you share how you've used this framework? So if you have shared this framework, can any of you share how? As you're chiming in, I'll add that Innovative Learning Group is doing an e-blast series right now. So if you're on our newsletter, you may have seen, we are doing kind of a gamified series of quiz questions that are based around this learning and performance ecosystem. So let's see. No comments yet, so I'm going to keep going. I'm guessing maybe this is a newer concept to folks and you haven't had a chance to apply it yet. But let me ask this, are there any questions here now that we're at the end of our first trend? Any questions up to this point about our first trend? I'll take that as we're all clear and ready to go on. Thank you. Okay, so our next trend is mobile learning. So our definition here is providing precisely what information workers need, when they need it, and where they need it. So this one's easy. We can just remember the W's here, right? So clearly mobile is front and center. It's not a fad. It's here to stay. And mobile learning probably is going to keep changing as we get new mobile and wearable devices. And then we get new authoring tools to go along with that. So most likely mobile is going to stay on these trends lists for years to come. So many questions need to be asked before committing to mobile learning. If you're thinking about how are you going to do this in your organizations. It's almost to me like thinking about having a mobile strategy. Hopefully you already have a learning strategy as the umbrella and an e-learning strategy. So now it's time to start thinking about a mobile strategy. So you want to ask yourselves, do you have learning needs that make sense for mobile? Where are your audiences at? If you're going to do mobile solutions, do you think you might buy them or build them? If you think you might build them, do you have staff that knows how to design for mobile and knows how to program for mobile, for example? Do you have a bring your own device strategy kind of thing? In other words, what devices does everybody have? Finally, how might you measure the impact of mobile learning if you set out on that path? So clearly you want to think about some of these decisions carefully and based on some real kind of rational need-based criteria. Because I think we'd all agree, right, using mobile for learning must be right, not just new and cool. I think we'd all agree too, right, that mobile learning is a lot more than just putting training courses on a tablet or a smartphone. Sure, it's okay for a tablet, right? The real estate probably makes more sense than on a smartphone. But really, right, mobile is going to be best used for informal learning, like reference information or job aids or collaboration, other forms of performance support. So with mobile, that line between work and learning blurs, and learning becomes just integrated right in with the job performance, which is what we're all about, because it's really about supporting the job performance anywhere at any time, and it's about the context. It's about information that can be targeted to a work's location or situation. Imagine if you're doing some performance support about, say, plant material or flowers, right? Isn't it going to be nice if it can be customized for the learner, whether they live in Washington in the Pacific Northwest or whether they're down in Florida, diagonally across the country, right? The types of plant material and flowers are going to be very different because of their location. I think you also want to look at the interaction and the communication, right? Because a worker can actually give information as well as take information. Imagine if you're a doctor, for example, in a remote kind of isolated area in a foreign country, and you see some kind of strange rash you've never seen. You can actually take a photo and send it back to perhaps an expert hospital here in the States, and they can send you some information about how to treat it. So give and take, and then certainly create, manipulate, share, all those things mobile make available. I think probably one of the noteworthy things about mobile is something called responsive design. And, not sure, probably a number of you have heard about that. But what responsive design does is, imagine kind of a full-size screen, right, that's filled with menus and content. Without responsive design, if you move that same interface and content to a smaller device, it all just shrinks, right? And it all gets really small and it becomes almost unusable and you can't see it. But with responsive design, as the real estate size shrinks, so does the layout. So even different information shows, it's formatted differently, it displays differently, all through responsive design. So this ability to do this is pretty important. And softwares now, authoring tools like Captivate 9 and Lectora 16 make this a whole lot easier. I think another trend here with mobile that's important to share is to date, we're really not seeing companies doing apps, right? So Marie shared we work with mid and large size companies. We're seeing very few of them doing apps. We're seeing almost 100% mobile websites which run in browsers. And another thing we're seeing is really a shift away from iOS and Android to actually running in Windows, like what happens if you're using a Surface Pro. I guess I'd be curious if you want to chime in and chat. Is anybody doing an app versus a website? And what's an example of that? Anybody doing an app? And what's an example of that in the chat? I know here at Innovative Learning Group, we've probably done over 50 mobile solutions at this point that work across both tablets and smartphones. All right, so we had one person chiming in that at a previous company they did many apps. Terrific. That's good feedback. No native apps at another company. Oh, another company did an app for some trivia, kind of like crack trivia. Okay, there's a way to get some engagement. Another person is using a website, not an app. Terrific. Somebody has mentioned they're in the orthopedic industry, and that's where they were using the apps. Terrific. All right, thanks for chiming in. Let's go on then to microlearning, our next trend. So microlearning is about learning in small steps. It's made possible with the aid of small, well-planned, bite-sized chunks of units or activities. Sometimes we hear those called learning nuggets or learning objects. And these are the short-term, digestible, and easy manageable. Right, so really about breaking down the training, deconstructing a longer traditional curriculum into easily consumable behaviors or pieces of information. The idea that we want to give learners bite-sized programs and frequently so that perhaps they fit into their workday more easily than maybe traditional learning works. Another word I hear is granular, very granular pieces of learning. And I think by virtue of it being small chunks, it makes it easy to personalize, and make it meet the needs of different learners. Sometimes I know that we see even the same content is offered in different delivery methods for this reason. So, right, the age-old question, how long should it be? How big is the bread box? I guess we're kind of being asked by our clients for nuggets in that 3 to 7 minute category. For example, we did a series of BrainShark modules on tax information, and they were each about 7 minutes each. Another area of interest we're seeing is where clients are interested in combining microlearning and gamification. We're not seeing a lot of real applications, but certainly the interest there. So, very targeted, focused, pick one skill or topic or learning object. And I think what we're hearing too is people want to get right to the point. They don't want to have a couple minutes of setup information. If something's only 3 to 7 minutes, get right to the meat of the learning objective. So what are some examples of this? How about a YouTube video where you're actually just showing how to diagnose or repair, like what about a washing machine in your basement, or in the business world, like a copy machine? How about instead of a participant guide, what if everybody got a placemat in their classroom seat, which was really a job aid? For one client, we did 3 electronic performance support tools, and each of them had an optional leader guide in case the leader or coach or mentor wanted to teach to the performance support tools. Another example, we did 10 scenarios. And again, the learner or the coach could pick out one of them or actually use all 10. I think we have lots of good, rich conversation about microlearning, though, and some of the conversations come up like, wow, can you really build skill over a TED Talk, for example? A lot of us, I know, I spent years and hours learning to play the piano or learning to play a sport, and there's the whole concept of it takes 10,000 hours to learn something. So, how many bits of microlearning do you need to string together and in what order to get to that expertise? I was having a discussion with one client, and she said, it's really about the relationship between the pieces. It's the context. It's the frame of reference. What comes before and what comes after. And of course, if you think about Twitter, right? Does everyone want to learn just something in 140 characters right now? So here on the screen, we did some work around a micro-learning strategy for one client, and this is just a piece of it. But I think, what we show at the left is we start out with, there's a need for some performance improvement, and hopefully you come out on the right side with improved performance. So what's this about here? It's about, first on the left side, looking at the different learning levels we may need to get to. It's kind of like Bloom's taxonomy. Are you trying to get to awareness or knowledge or skill or mastery? Based on that level, how might you achieve that in the next column to the right? Can you do that with merely information? Or do you need performance support? Or do you need some combination of training and performance support, etc.? Now look at that next column over with the assets. That column right there is just a wealth of information. Look at all the things you could do for microlearning. Articles, audios, videos, speeches, presentations, webinars. In the next box down, how about quick reference guides or FAQs, job aids, product sales guides, social discussions. In the next box below, I might highlight case studies, application activities. Going further down, how about audio or video modeling? How about practice assignments or simulations? Further down, we have checklists, forms, collaboration tools. How about coaching guides, right? So no shortage of way to get microlearning out there, all in the name of improving performance. I'm just taking a look up to see if we have any questions here or comments at all around microlearning before we go on. All right, terrific. Let's take a look then at Learning Portal. This is something that we are being asked for more and more. And for a definition, it's an internet site that provides a gateway to a company's learning resources, including the LMS, reference information that exists elsewhere on the internet, and other company systems related to employee development. So what we see is today's technology makes it possible for employees to access an abundance of learning resources to help them do their jobs better. However, with more resources comes the potential for more chaos. Learners just can't find what they need, and company intranets become dumping grounds for material. One of my colleagues and I did a presentation at the Performance Support Symposium or conference about a year ago. And the presentation was called Finding Your Way to Usable Performance Support. And just kind of as our call to action, we started out with a skit. And so my colleague was standing at the back of the room. And so I started out and I said, "Hey, Sue, you look lost." And she said, "Well, that new policy came out and I'm just trying to find that new policy." And I shouted back, "Well, have you tried the knowledge management system?" "Well, I looked there, I can't find it." And I said, "Well, have you looked on SharePoint?" "Oh, it's not there." "Well, how about the LMS?" And I barely threw my sentence right, and Sue just screams out of frustration. Right? How many of you feel like you've kind of been in that same situation? It's out there, you just can't find it. So the Learning Portal then helps us with that one-stop shopping. It's one place to go. It's a gateway to help you get to the LMS or the SharePoint site and all sorts of legacy mainframe systems maybe, or maybe off-the-shelf libraries of assets that are good for you, huh? I guess let me clarify one question we often get is, what's the difference between an LMS or a learning portal? And I think the idea is that the learning portal is broader. It can be the umbrella, whereas the LMS is a software system that manages and administers learning process. It houses the course catalog and curricula. Certainly it tracks training history, but that learning portal can really be the umbrella. So as performance professionals, what are we doing here? Well, we're really like then the curators, like at an art museum. We're making sense of all those assets. We're making sure that there's an engaging way for the professionals to interact. more and more now there's user-generated content, right? So what tools can we provide to help make that able to curate all that information and make it accessible? So if you're going to go down this path as a learning and performance professional, what are you thinking about? First I think it's helpful to reflect on the job. What's really needed, in the workflow of doing that job? So if you're going to have a portal, what's the scope of that portal going to be? What all is going to be included? What's inbounds and what's out of bounds? What's going to be the sequence of learning? For one client, we were helping them with their learning portal, but we also had to do at the same time was help with the learning paths, because that became the basis for, all right, if I find these learning assets, is there any logic or prescribed way about how I proceed? What's my journey through these learning assets? And so by doing learning paths, that helps with that. You also have to think about, if you have a portal, you have to think about the taxonomy. In other words, how's it going to be organized? How's it going to be structured? How are you going to label things? How's the learner or the user going to navigate through? What about the look and feel? Are you going to brand it a certain way to match maybe your university or your overall organization, for example? And then finally, if it's serving as the umbrella to all these other things, how's the technology work? How are you really going to link it to your SharePoint or your LMS, etc., and then build all those assets? Do any of you have, that you could share in chat, do you have examples of how you've used a learning portal or what you've used it for? I know we had another client, they brought us in because they already had a portal, but it was, it really was one of those examples of chaos. So we were able to start out with interviews and a survey, and then get into some really detailed use case scenarios and personas to really understand the typical profile of the person using it, and then maybe recommend a better taxonomy and a better search function. I'm just taking a peek in chat. Somebody has shared that they have a portal for staff where they can go and find all education that they release from the LMS. So very broad. Thank you. There's another company that uses it to provide information to their field staff. Very nice, especially they're probably dispersed geographically. Another company is offering courses through MOOC to kind of enhance the internal training that's going on. That's a great example. Here's one that's a healthcare organization, has an intranet for the group called Habits. So it includes links to various documents for the group, etc. Okay, very nice. Thanks for chiming in on that. So I think in summary, right, we're big believers that a well-designed and developed learning portal can prove to be a really powerful tool for any company and a great resource for employees. So feel free, if you have any questions regarding Learning Portal, go ahead and enter those in the chat. We have somebody sharing that they have low usage because they still have to email items and then tell them to go to the portal. Okay, so multi-step. Fantastic. All right, our next trend then is social learning. And as definition, we say this considers how we learn from one another, and now how we learn from one another via digital devices. If you remember back from, this is just one piece from that ecosystem we talked about at the beginning. So I think it's fair to say that social learning isn't new, right? I mean, probably a large percentage of learning in any organization comes from people talking to each other and doing their work and learning on the job. I mean, a lot of these organizations, right, probably only function because social learning happens. We saw some data from a recent survey, and 43% of the respondents said that social learning, along with mobile, was one of their top targets for kind of technology exploration in the coming year. So obviously mobile in this social learning here is pretty important. I think too the internet, right, is driving a lot of this because it's allowing us to interact socially even though we're physically removed from one another. I think, though, you think about, okay, why are we doing this, right? The goal certainly is to make the learning experiences as meaningful and as realistic as possible. Because you can make, again, right, as learning professionals, and how are we helping? What we're trying to do then is make moves that we can to better leverage what's already happening, okay? So how might we do this? What are some uses here? Well, certainly social learning is a great way to augment formal learning. It's a way to facilitate collaborative learning, right? So learner to learner rather than just learner to teacher. I see a number of the professional associations using like a community of practice. For example, ISPI has something called ISPI Collaborate. So that's a good use, so the members can share and learn. How about to encourage self-organized personal learning, right? When I get in discussions about social learning, one of the challenges, though, I hear is, how do we get people to participate? They have so many places they're supposed to go every day and so many things they're supposed to look at. How do we get them to really engage and participate? I guess my answer here is it really goes back to the adult learning principles that we all know and familiar with from grad school. That the individual needs to know something rather than just kind of nice to know. It's really critical to their job success. We also know that learners like some amount of choice and freedom as they make decisions. So that's some good criteria. So certainly there's numerous benefits from leveraging a more social approach to learning. And usually this means what we're doing is we're getting the learner more active, right? They're having a more engaging experience. I saw a quote, it's no longer a spectator sport then. So really as humans, we have this desire to connect with other people and to create visibility. So if you're comfortable, I'd encourage you to put photos, encourage employees to put photos out on their profiles and really encourage that peer-to-peer connection and relatedness. So again, as in our field or as our roles, we need to be curators of all these great resources and connections. So like anything, you need to figure out who's your audience, where do they already hang out? Is there a way to leverage where they're already hanging out? Make sure you figure out what are you really trying to achieve from a business result standpoint and a performance standpoint. What will be different when you're done? And then finally, some of the nits and bits of this is what sort of social tool might you use? And is it possible that there's some kind of existing technology in something you already have? So for example, any of you that have Salesforce.com, it has built-in functionality called chatter that you might leverage. So another quote, right? Social media technologies in and of themselves have no value. It's only when the people use the technologies and the knowledge that the people share through those technologies that we create some value. Let's pause, and I'd love in the chat to understand any questions or comments that you might have about social learning or any of the other trends that we've talked about so far today. All right, thanks for the pause there. Let's take a look then at gamification. So this is the use of game mechanics and gameplay in non-game context in order to engage the users and solve problems. So this is really about gaming techniques. How do we make it relevant? How do we use it in a meaningful way? How do we make sure that it's motivating both intrinsically and extrinsically, right? I don't know, for those of you that are familiar with Gilbert's model, we have cell 3, which talks about that external motivation, rewards and recognition. We know that box 6 or cell 6 talks about the intrinsic, within yourself, what gets you up every morning when the alarm clock goes off. So there's a lot of arguments about how gamification can help with these things. So what are some of these gaming techniques? We have badges, we have levels, we have leaderboards and currency. We have systems for awarding and redeeming and trading and gifting. We could be exchanging points or now virtual currency, for example. Sometimes we have challenges between users. We set up a competition, if you will. Some of the underlying variables that really make gamification work are really about effective performance motivators. Think about feedback, right? Like a progress bar. You get feedback on how you did on an exercise. Maybe you're doing some social comparison, peer-to-peer or expert to novice. You're doing some positive reinforcement. You're helping with loss avoidance, right? That's all the part that's really embedded as we think about gamification. And like always, we don't want to just jump into this because someone thinks it's cool and new. We want to start with doing our thorough audience analysis. Right? Think about the difference if your audience is a bunch of engineers versus a bunch of salespeople, and how different that external and internal motivation might be because of that role and who they are. I even was talking to one colleague once, and she even mentioned she might even be shamed by this whole concept. She said the last thing she would want to see is her name on a leaderboard. So I think it's really pause for a moment and see what makes sense for your audience. If you are going to use it, some good practices are probably around practice, when we really need to get to fluency, maybe around problem solving or career development, for example. The one thing I do think about, though, for those of you that are fans of Ruth Clark, like I am, she often talks about cognitive overload, or your short-term memory is just full. Because sometimes when you have to learn something and then you put another layer of gaming, kind of gamification on top of it, it really adds one more layer of information that you have to learn. So just a note of caution to be careful that you're not creating a distraction rather than something that's really helpful from a learning standpoint. I guess what always comes to my mind then is, what do you really want to gamify? Should you gamify everything because of that motivation piece? Or do you really need to be very deliberate and intentional with picking the right situations, the right things that are really tied to your meaningful business goals and performance objectives? And certainly budget has to be considered. There are certainly probably vendors that you've started to hear in the marketplace. There's certainly a vendor called Badgeville that's one of the leaders in looking at using badges and using leaderboards, for example. There's a number of vendors that are quite good at sending out follow-up knowledge questions or quiz questions on maybe a once a week or once a day basis, for example. Organizations like MindMarker and Exonify and QStream. And there's even now off-the-shelf software where it can give you points for using new functionality in a software. So it's a way to kind of measure if people are adopting some new functionality that you might have. Can anybody share in chat ways that they're using gamification in their organization? Or certainly now this is a good time to chime in with any questions or comments that you might have.
Lisa, we had a couple comments around the social collaboration, social media piece.
So I see one that says, yeah, we found out students are disengaging with social media altogether. Social learning is very popular with the younger workers, another person said. I'm curious, there's probably a lot behind it. You'd have to do a root cause analysis, but why folks are disengaging with social media. I think sometimes I just say, it's what I said earlier, people just have too many places to go every day. And it's tricky to get it all done along with their work. So then you go back to doing a performance analysis, right? Do they have time to do it? Do they have the right rewards and recognition to do it? Has somebody set an expectation for them that it's important to do, for example?
Got a couple comments around gamification, I believe.
Yep, so good. I know let's see, somebody uses gaming during new hire training to help the new employees network. Oh, that's terrific, because they're doing a couple things at the same time there to get to engage folks and to start to create those relationships and human connections. Oh, okay, somebody else is saying in their organization they do interdepartmental competitions. So that's nice. I'm sure that creates some camaraderie and friendliness along with the competition, and hopefully learning some new relevant information to help them reach their business results. Terrific. Thanks for chiming in. Okay, let's go on to our next trend is Agile. So any approach to content development that focuses on speed, flexibility, and collaboration. So in today's highly competitive global marketplace, concepts such as time to proficiency have become high priorities for businesses. And in the training field then, often we hear this need for speed, right? Sometimes we call it rapid content development. I'm certain many of us have heard of something called SAM, which is Successive Approximation Model. This is an approach to Agile learning design that's been introduced as really an alternative to ADDIE, and tries to emphasize collaboration and efficiency and repetition. I think, and we've all seen articles, it's this notion that ADDIE just takes too long. It's just too rigorous. People want to be, they want to move in a nimble way. They want to have flexibility. They want things to move in a rapid fashion. We could spend a 2-week workshop talking about Agile, but the idea here is that you're not taking huge amount of time to perfect things. You're not spending 3 months perfecting your design document, and then 3 months perfecting your storyboards, and then 3 months programming, right? That's very kind of methodical and probably too slow and inflexible for some situations. So the idea is that you're really doing a lot of iteration, a lot of prototyping. We're not sure how this interaction is going to work. Let's mock it up and try it and get some reaction. So there's certainly pros and cons to doing this if you think about it. Some of the pros are just what we talked about, that iterative approach. It's not so rigid. It's more fluid. You get more collaboration. As you go through that, the thinking evolves. You learn new things as you go. For those of you that have studied formal evaluation, it's like that formative evaluation, what you do along the way. What do you think, though, is on the con side of that? Well, some people might be saying, wow, all that iteration and back and forth, maybe that costs more. Maybe it does take longer. It also sometimes requires that, if you have a team involved, right, the team maybe needs to be, available at the drop of a hat so you can really get that collaboration and consensus before you iterate further. I think another note of caution here is, right, we've all seen it when all we're doing is iterating on the content. We're not making the instructional design any better. We're just playing with the words and the paragraphs on the page. So that's certainly not what you want to have happen either. Comments about Agile or questions about Agile? And I think it's not black and white. It doesn't have to be you're doing Agile or you're not doing Agile. It can be what parts and pieces of Agile can you even incorporate in your methodology a little bit, and even just try some things out and see how they work. We have one person here. They'd love to just understand more about disengagement of students. Okay, so it's kind of chiming into our earlier conversation there. Very good. All right. Our next trend is personalization, which is the ability to choose time, device, style, and even intensity of content and context and collaboration. So today our workers expect that they can really select and sequence and manage and access learning resources in any manner of their choosing. And really, why wouldn't they, right? They can go to Starbucks and order their coffee any way they want. They can go into iTunes and organize their playlist any way they want. So how do we think about providing learning in a context that's relevant to individuals, rather than kind of this one-size-fits-all is our challenge. We even see companies where they, for example, have renamed their LMS My Learning. And they make it very personal, based on how you sign on. It knows your role. It's very learner-centric. So I'm sure many of you know Elliot Macy. He cautions us where he says, wow, do we want personalization or specification, right? And his concern is about that learners may have some ingrained preferences, and that maybe some of those preferences aren't in the best interest of both the individual and the organization. What if somebody likes video more than reading, or practice more than theory, or the learners are drawn to one topic and have no interest in another key element to the curriculum? Or maybe they feel like they're really fully competent in some area and they just skip it altogether. So Elliot would suggest that we add a few elements to the concept of personal choice that maybe more deeply serve the needs of the learner and the employer and the entire enterprise learning culture. One thing he recommends is, if you've heard about machine learning, it's this idea that the LMS can modify the content and the activities based on the behavior. Or what about where you can do some continuous assessment and content mapping? Or occasionally you can throw in a stretch offer for the learner. Or maybe the dashboard for the learner has a blend of choices and organizational assignments. So it's kind of that idea about choices, but making sure these are really good choices that serve the individual as well as the organization. Any comments here on personalization you might like to share in chat? All right. Our next trend then is mindfulness, which is the mental state achieved by focusing one's awareness on the present moment while calmly acknowledging and accepting one's feelings and thoughts and bodily sensations, right? So we actually did a dress rehearsal yesterday, and somebody said, wow, I almost wonder, why mindfulness? I mean, I get it, but why are we talking about this as a learning trend? And I think there's really two reasons. One is, how can we learn if we're stressed or if we feel threatened, right? How are we in any kind of learning mode, ability to soak up new information if we're stressed or feeling threatened? I think the other reason it's coming up on the lists of learning trends is because I know multiple learning departments that are being asked to provide mindfulness training to either the entire organization or certain populations in the organization. So I think that's why mindfulness is showing up on these lists. But what is it about, really? It's about being present, about having non-judgmental awareness, being mindful about going too fast. Certainly many of us know, right? People that are very overwhelmed. They just need to simplify. They need some breathing space, some reflection time. They just need to pause. It's the idea that if folks have a little bit more sense of empathy and compassion, right, for both themselves and others in the office, this can certainly bring some calm to the workplace. It helps people realize that they have some choices. It says, hey, you know what, you're okay. How you're feeling right now is pretty darn normal. It helps it helps folks have an open mind, to be awake, to pay attention, to have better perspective, right? This is going to certainly help us all be more innovative. I think it's the idea that it gives us some insight on where we have stress and how we respond, and do we fight or flight. So it gives us that opportunity to check in with ourselves. A lot of people then are doing meditation and reflection. I think we see, right, in a lot of the leadership curriculum that journaling and reflection is a big part of this, and I think this is why. So certainly the research is starting to show that mindful workers can report higher levels of happiness and productivity, and that certainly when companies are doing this in a meaningful way, they are seeing results like healthcare costs drop and injury rates decline. So really some clear health benefits and mental benefits. Some of the organizations you can read about that are doing this, the Marines, Google, General Mills, Aetna, Goldman Sachs, Target. I'd be curious to see in chat, are any of you doing this in your organizations?
Lisa, we had a question. Do you think this could be a reaction to too much social media, which can be stressful to some people?
I think absolutely. And I guess I can't help wonder then if, it's not going back and doing a good performance analysis, because really, by doing things like meditating and reflecting, you're treating the symptoms. But what are we doing as performance improvement specialists to make sure that we're fixing, the root cause of the performance challenge? So, yeah, very nice comment there. Any other examples here? Yeah, somebody is saying we have used personalization in a high-level leadership development programs where the leaders partner with their manager to formulate a learning plan based on their needs. Very good. So thank you for chiming in on personalization. Okay, another comment then about mindfulness is one organization, they do empathy skill training in many of their programs. Very nice. Another, after their training, they give out Be Here Now plaques. Oh, I love that. Be Here Now plaques. I think I need one of those. My kids would love that. All right, good comments there. Thank you. All right, let's go on to storytelling. This is the interactive art of using words and actions to review the elements and images of a story while encouraging the listener's imagination. So again, right, this is about engagement. And it's like gamification. It's not new. Stories or narratives have been shared in every culture as a means of entertainment or education or cultural preservation, how to instill moral values. It's probably the most common way of teaching others, particularly in an oral tradition-based culture. The idea here is really to make it memorable, to have a call to action, to pull at the heartstrings. I guess this is another one where you may say, okay, storytelling's been around forever, but why is it making the trends list now? I guess I don't have any research on this, but I'm wondering if it's, we've all seen so much bad e-learning. I think in classroom it's pretty typical that the instructor goes off script a little bit and tells some hopefully relevant stories, right? But in e-learning, maybe we haven't done enough of that in a good way to really make it memorable and engaging. Because we want learners to feel and experience on an emotional level, because that's what elicits a response to go or change or do, something different, something new that results in a meaningful change, right? Because that's what we're looking for. That's what we're looking for with learning. So there's actually a part of the brain, it's a small part of the brain at the back of the head called the amygdala that regulates emotions. So that part of the brain can override the logic that you get from that larger prefrontal cortex. So what that means is if we can get new skills and behaviors to pass through the amygdala, there's a whole lot better chance of it being remembered and implemented. I'd be curious in the chat area if you have examples of using storytelling in your learning solutions. I know we've done a few things. In one first aid course, it started out with music and an emergency call from a desperate person at the end of the phone. We did another course for distracted driving where we started out with really compelling footage from ABC and NBC on the problems that are caused by distracted driving. Let's see, somebody in pharma training, they're always telling patient stories. Very nice. I'm sure those testimonials really pull at the heartstrings. Somebody else is using storytelling to explain complicated concepts. Very nice. A lot of kind of life work experience, sharing some personal stories. Good. One client did something around active shooter to educate employees and some storytelling there. Oh, another one is in a diversity course That's really nice because they could observe the behavior in others rather than themselves. Good examples. Because that's what I was going to go on to say, is it's really a great way to convey content in the appropriate context. Because so much of what we teach is not black and white, it's gray. And, humans crave connections with other humans, and as learning professionals, we're charged with building those experiences that support the connections. So emotions can help with all that, and so can storytelling. All right. I think based on what I heard, the questions we had right at the beginning, I'm going to go ahead and jump right to augmented reality, because a number of folks mentioned they hadn't heard of that. And I think even in the last month, we've seen quite a bit in the media about augmented reality. So this is a novel way of superimposing digital contents into the real context. So this is about creating situated learning. This is about understanding the learner's situation, because that really has a huge impact on how they're going to learn. It's the merging of the real environment with other virtual information in real time. And with augmented reality, this is coming easier and easier. I mean, think about if you're learning to shoot a gun, right? It's a very different scenario if you're just on a sunny day in a shooting range with, just a calm environment around you. That's going to be very different than if you're expected from a performance standpoint to shoot a gun, while you're being fired at and it's dark or hazy and raining, right? The situation is very different. What are we seeing happening in this world, right? Certainly Pokemon Go is the newest craze here. We also saw a while back the New York Times, if you got the New York Times on Sunday, right, you got those cardboard Google glasses where you could just download the app to your iPhone and put the iPhone in the glasses and try it out. All those things, they put you right in a situation. With the Google glasses, you felt like you were right in Paris, looking around 360 degrees, seeing the Eiffel Tower. So what implications does this have for learning? Imagine if you're trying to train first responders to something like a national disaster. What if you have some new locations or buildings that you're opening up, or new employees, that you want to show parts of your facilities and whatnot? This is a great way to do it. Or what about demonstrating complicated physical tasks before you actually have a learner do something, right? Especially if it involves something that's risky, or like surgery, or flying a plane. A simulation is a great idea. So again, it's about the context, it's about the simulation, but certainly this is a really kind of interesting proposition and definitely a cool way to consider going forward what's going to be right for your situation. I'm not sure it's on the cheap side though, so something to caution as you head into it. All right, I want to go back to that piece of paper that you wrote on at the very beginning of the webinar or on your smartphone. I'd love to see in the chat, what did you write down? Put in chat, what's the one thing you wrote down that you hadn't tried yet but that you would like to try? Somebody said more around collaboration. Good. What else did you write? Who wrote down? Who can share what you wrote down on that piece of paper that you wanted to try but haven't tried yet? More remote learning. Excellent. And certainly the technology affords us ways to do that.
We have a more in small bits.
More in small bits, yep. So maybe without even knowing it, you knew about microlearning. Well, I think it's fair to say that if we picked a word of the day, it would be context, right? Whether it's microlearning or personalization or storytelling or augmented reality. It's really about that context. It's about understanding the learner's situation. So at that point, feel free to put in questions that you have here in the chat. We'll make sure we answer those, but I'm going to wrap things up here and turn it back over to Marie.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. And we want to thank all of you for joining us today in the webinar. Our contact information is going to be on the screen here. And you'll see that Lisa and ILG both have a way for you to reach out on Twitter and join us. And also we have a LinkedIn group called Friends of Innovative Learning Group. We encourage you to join there and join in discussions and posts, etc., if you already haven't done so. And we are going to be following up with a survey. You're going to receive that in just a few minutes here, and please fill that out. We like our feedback. Thank you again for joining us, and have a terrific day.